So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Stelarc to you. He is a robotic artist, and we met maybe 4 years ago in Brussels, where you gave a fantastic talk, and it was great meeting you there. And you showed me already there straight away the ear on your arm. I hope it's still there. Yes, Stelarc has an ear on the arm. Maybe you're going to talk about that, or
yes,
or you
will be
okay,
mentioned.
that's very good.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fantastic. So I invited Stelarc straight away to come to ICRA, the International Conference on Robotics and Automation. You might have heard about that. And it will start actually on the 29th of May, which is a bank holiday, we know that. And it worked all out. Stelarc will be there, so I'm looking very, very much forward to seeing you there at the conference. But also looking very much forward to seeing your presentation today. So, all yours. Thanks
very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Then you can start the way you do.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So these projects and performances really have nothing to do with scientific research. They can be characterized as aesthetic gestures, two possibilities of human-machine interaction or human augmentation. I'll be mentioning projects and performances that have been done over the years, not so much in kind of the historical time, but more how they're logically connected. So between 1973 and 1975, I made 3 films of the inside of my body. For me then, the body was no longer simply a surface of skin, but rather an internal structure of circulatory systems, of empty cavities, of tissue, of bone, and so on. But about 20 years later, for the 5th Australian Sculpture Triennial, I decided to design a sculpture for the inside of my body. The theme of the triennial was site-specific works, but instead of a sculpture for a public space, this was a sculpture for a private physiological organ. The sculpture, fully closed, is a capsule that can be inserted down the esophagus into the stomach cavity, but inside the stomach, it can open and close, extend and retract. It has a flashing light and a beeping sound. So a simple machine choreography inside a soft organ of the body. So the sculpture here is a sculpture that is not indicative of the body being a site for social inscription or a site for the psyche. Rather here, the body is just simply a site for a sculpture. So the body becomes a host for its own work of art. Art is not an external object, but an internal machine that functions inside the body. So we can say now there's no longer meaningful distinctions between the internal and external spaces of the body, and increasingly no distinction between the living and the dead. In fact, Nietzsche reminds us that the living are only a species of the dead. So we're living in a time of what I call circulating flesh. We can take the organs of one body and insert them into another body. We can take the hands from a cadaver and stitch them to the arms of an amputee and reanimate those cadaver hands. I met the first double hand transplant in a medical conference in Paris. Only after 6 months, he could move his cadaver fingers, and he had a rudimentary sense of pressure, temperature, and texture. The first augmentation of the body was what I call the third hand. This was completed in 1980, sophisticated enough at the time to get invitations from the Jet Propulsion Lab and the Johnson Space Center in Houston to demonstrate the hand to the extravehicular activity group. It's actuated by EMG signals from the abdominal and leg muscles. So by controlling the leg and abdominal muscles, generating electrical signals, you could actuate the hand. Wrist rotation, a pinch release, a grasp release. So very simple, 2-3 degrees of freedom, but it enabled you to grasp and pinch, grip objects. And I really like the definition of technology by Marshall McLuhan, that technology is the external organs of the body. You know, we've evolved as these biological bodies with soft internal organs, but now inhabiting a technological terrain, we need to engineer additional external organs for the body, external interfaces for a technological terrain. Initially, the third hand was just a visual attachment to the body. But I did try some other things. Here, the three hands are writing one word, each hand writing a separate letter at the same time. I had to keep my two eyes on what my three hands were doing. And because of the spacing of the three hands, you were writing every third letter. And because this was on a sheet of glass between the artist and the audience, I was writing it back to front. So it was a rather tedious and very slow process. I only learned to write two words, evolution and decadence, because these were both 9-letter words. So the body now has become this contemporary chimera of meat, metal and code, and the body is now performing beyond the boundaries of its skin and beyond the local space that it inhabits. We do this in a mundane way all the time with our wireless devices. We can project our physical presence to other places at any time. Now, this is quite a mundane act that we can do now. When I was growing up, this was not such a possibility. We're not getting the sound out. It's one that we tested the sound before, but okay, beauty. So this performance began when the body was switched on, and it ended when the body was switched off. The sounds you heard were amplified body signals and sounds, brain waves, heartbeat, blood flow, muscle signals, plus the sounds of the third hand. So this cacophony of sounds indicated the physiological condition of the body, which altered gradually over the period of the performance. The laser beams were directed to the eyes via optic fiber cable, and instead of the eyes being passive receptors of light, passive receptors of images, here there's an indication that light can be transmitted from the body, that images can be generated by the body. So actually controlling the muscles around the eyes, you could scribble simple images in the gallery space. The extended arm, and I'll actually demonstrate this at the end physically, but it's what's on the table here, and it's something that I'll be using or performing with at ICRA. So it's a pneumatically actuated arm. It extends my right arm to primate proportions. There's wrist rotation, there's thumb rotation, there's individual finger flexion, and each finger splits open. So each finger theoretically can be a gripper in itself. So it's kind of human-like, but with additional capabilities. For performance, I use it more to choreograph and compose the sounds that are being generated by the clicking sounds, the solenoid switches, the compressed air, and also I'll be wearing what I call a sensor bracelet, where I can generate a sound by moving my arm and turning my wrist and fingers and modulating the pitch and tone of the sound. So in other words, the movements of the body, the choreography of the limbs compose the sounds that you hear. In this performance, though, my left arm is involuntarily moving, pre-programmed for the 4-hour continuous performance via a muscle stimulation system. So I can forget what my left arm is doing. That's moving involuntarily for the whole 4 hours, but my right arm is extended and I control with my own agency. So we had the shadow of the body performing, a live stream of the video, so people online could see what was happening. And we had also constructed a 3D model of the hand mechanism, and online that mimicked the movements of the actual hand. So I'm sort of jumping backwards and forwards in time. This is going now back to 1995. This is the muscle stimulation control box. The blue switches indicate which muscles you could pre-program. And we had this was in 1995, we had a 3D model of the body. So by touching the muscles on the computer model performs your choreography. And a second later in Luxembourg, where my body was, my body moved involuntarily. So people in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Media Lab in Helsinki, the Doors of Perception Conference in Amsterdam, for example, could remotely access and remotely choreograph the movements of the body in Luxembourg. So presence now becomes somewhat problematic. It's marked by a double presence, or perhaps absence is marked by a double presence. So we are neither all here now nor all there all of the time, but partly here sometimes and partly somewhere else at other times. Ping body, instead of people in other places, choreographing the movements of the body. Here we use the ping protocol for the duration of the performance, pinging 40 global locations, the reverberating pings coming back to the host computer, measured in milliseconds, mapped to the body's muscles. The body moves, so the body becomes a kind of crude barometer of internet activity. This is in 1996. And in 1997, another online interactive performance titled Parasite. Here we customized the search engine to scan the net, to select anatomical images of the body from the net, to project them to my head-up display. The complexity of the image is analysed, and depending on that complexity, the body moves more or less actively. So here, the images that you see are the images that move your body. The sounds that you're hearing are fragments of sounds from the internet that the search engine also picked up. And I had tilt sensors on my arms, legs and head. So as my body moves involuntarily, it switches the cameras above to the side. The body becomes the live video switcher and video mixer. So the choreography of imagery that you see is due to the involuntary movements of the body. So the body in these performances is no longer merely an object of desire, but rather as an object that requires rethinking and possibly redesigning. An ambidextrous arm project that I initiated at Brunel University when I was there for several years in London. So imagine a universally designed human-like manipulator that fingers can bend one way, the thumb can rotate, you have a right hand, but the fingers can bend completely the other way, the thumb can rotate backwards, so you have a left hand and a right hand all in the one design. So, I mean, if you were an amputee and you had lost your right hand, why not replace it with an ambidextrous hand? Sometimes two left hands might better perform a task than a left hand or a right hand. An inverse motion capture system that was performed in I think 2000, where an avatar is imbued with genetic algorithms, so the avatar's behavior alters for the duration of the performance. And what happens is that the avatar accesses the upper part of my body via the exoskeleton. So my upper body is avatar actuated, whilst the lower part of my body is free to perform with its own agency. An inverse motion capture system where you're sort of seamlessly sliding between being avatar actuated and performing with your own agency. So as well as a time of circulating flesh, it's also a time of fractal flesh, where bodies and bits of bodies spatially separated are electronically connected, generating recurring patterns of interactivity at varying scales. That's basically another definition of the internet. Right? As well as manipulators, I've also been interested in locomotion. Insect and animal locomotion was especially interesting. Here we engineered in 1997 a six-legged walking robot, robust enough to support the artist's body, and the upper exoskeleton allows the artist to select the walking movements through his different arm gestures. So I can get the robot to walk forwards or backwards with the ripple gait, sideways with the tripod gait. The robot can squat, it can stand, it can turn on the spot. And this is done simply by making different arm gestures. It's also a sound machine as well as a visual performative object. The exoskeleton was only 3 meters in diameter. This machine, which was done at Nottingham Trent University, with funding from the Wellcome Trust of all people, is 5 meters in diameter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a very, very large walking machine, and how it functions basically. Simple animation will show this. I have encoders on my hip and leg joints. If I lift one leg up, 3 robot legs lift and swing forward. So by stepping up and down, the robot walks. It's always stable because it's always supported on 3 legs. There are sensors in the chassis of the machine. So if the artist turns, the robot walks in that direction. So all of these projects and performances are about exploring alternative anatomical architectures. What does it mean to perform with an extra hand, an extended arm, a 6-legged walking robot, an extra ear? The walking head is only a 2-meter diameter walking robot, but it is autonomous. It has a rotating ultrasound sensor which detects if someone approaches the robot. If someone approaches the robot stands, selects from its library of possible movements, and then performs a simple choreography, and then sits down, goes to sleep until the next person is detected. So the intent here was to engineer a kind of actual virtual system where the leg movements of the robot modulate the facial behavior of the head. By the way, none of these projects have been fully realized. I've made a career out of being a failure. Nothing turns out the way that I imagine it. And there's always, of course, restrictions with budgets and constraints with expertise and assistance. But at least they're partially realised, and they could be much more interestingly and more sophisticatedly functioning. This one hasn't been completed at all in any form yet, but this little animation will indicate the intent. The intent is to, and we've begun on the project, but it's taking a long time to realise it. A small robot, robust enough to climb up my tongue and into my mouth. I just have to be careful not to swallow. But again, it's a kind of an aesthetic gesture as to the increasing intimacy with our machines. As these technologies become micro and nano scaled, they will be simply incorporated inside the human body. In fact, one might suggest that in the future, all technology is invisible because it is inside your body. We may be able to repopulate the human body, recolonize the human body with nanoscaled machines and sensors. We don't perhaps need a more external surveillance, but we certainly need more internal surveillance because nothing alerts us of pathological beginnings at a cellular scale. By the time you detect the lump in your breast or in your chest, it's too late. The cancer has spread, the cancer has metastasized. If you can detect these cells at an early stage, then they're easily targeted and eradicated, and there's already research being done on that level. So in this age of body hacking, gene mapping, prosthetic augmentation, organ swapping, face transplants, synthetic skin, what it means to be a body, what it means to be human, and what generates aliveness and agency becomes problematic. So in these spaces of proliferating prosthetic bodies, partial life, artificial life, the biological body has become radically obsolete. A project where we scanned the artist's head. We scanned a hominid skull. We did a digital transplant of the human face over the hominid skull, producing a kind of composite face, you know, post-hominid, but kind of pre-human. And then we 3D printed a scaffold, and we grew a layer of living skin over that scaffold. It got contaminated within days in the gallery and had to be fixed in formaldehyde for the rest of the exhibition. But this partial head becomes a partial portrait of the artist, which was partially living. The prosthetic head was a 3D chatbot that was completed in 2001, separate eyeballs, tongue and teeth. You could interrogate the head and the head would be able in real time lip sync and respond to you with spoken voice. Sometimes it sounded quite intelligent as a chatbot. Sometimes it gave you a stupid answer. It's kind of like the artist, right? And an updated version done about 4 years ago, where instead of being a projection of a virtual head, here we mounted a monitor featuring the updated prosthetic head on a robotic arm. So as well as the movements and facial expressions of the virtual head, this was augmented by the physical 6 degree of freedom movements of the robot. So this is sort of a virtual and physical installation. And of course, now we can instantly scan a head, either using laser technology or photogrammetry, and we can produce these instant hyperreal skins. In fact, in the near future, audio visually, you will not be able to distinguish whether the person at the other end is simply, you know, an artificial skin that's animated and speaking to you, or whether it's the actual person. So literally now skins have become our screens have become our skins. That's how we interface with other people. So skins as screens now are increasingly attaining optical and haptic thickness. In other words, it's this thickening that collapses the psychological space between remotely linked bodies. So it'll be possible to have an intimacy without proximity, an intimacy without skin contact. Blender was a project done with another artist, Nina Sellers, where both artists had 4.6 litres of their biomaterial extracted using liposuction. That material was inserted in an installation titled Blender. This was the inverse of the stomach sculpture. So instead of a machine choreography inside a soft organ of the body, here a machine installation becomes the host for a liquid body composed of biomaterial from two artists' bodies. Anthropomorphic in scale, about the height of the artist, and there were proximity sensors in the chassis of the installation. So whenever anyone got close to the installation, that would trigger the blender blades to mix the biomaterial. If we can engineer an artificial womb and bring to bear a healthy child, then life would not begin with a biological birth. It's already done with animals, by the way. And if we can replace malfunctioning parts of the body with stem cell grown organs, 3D bioprinted and artificial parts, then we need not die a biological death. So how do we define human existence if it doesn't begin with a biological birth and doesn't necessarily end with a biological death? In fact, most of us now will not die biological deaths. We'll die when our life support systems are switched off. And in 2017, a US woman, Tina Gibson, successfully gave birth to her daughter from a 25-year-old frozen embryo. That embryo was the same age as her. And it's now plausible that we can sustain frozen eggs and keep them viable for perhaps 50 years. And if that's the case, then what happens is that we're increasingly desynchronizing a human existence with the reproductive processes. In other words, you could be born on the deathbed of your twin brother or sister, or you could be born generations after the death of your mother. So it's an interesting disconnection between reproductive processes and individual existences. The ear project initially was imaged as an ear on the side of my head, an anatomically stupid place to put an extra ear, because no surgeon would help. The possibility of partial face paralysis. But in 2006, we did get funding to construct an ear on my arm. The scaffold is a biopolymer that is porous, and it's the porosity of that biopolymer that encourages tissue ingrowth and vascularization to happen. So in other words, the ear becomes literally a living part of your body. It has its own blood supply. The light is not so good. We can turn the lights on at the end of the session. You can see it better. But in this second surgery, we did insert a small microphone in the ear construct. The idea being that this was not just a means of replicating an ear and relocating it, but rather possibly electronically augmenting the ear to internet enable it. So you might log into my ear and listen to this lecture from another place, or listen to a conversation that's being carried on. I've got two good ears to hear with. This extra ear is not for me. The possibility of an ear for people elsewhere. You can see here, even with bandages wrapped around my ear with a partial plaster cast, the surgeon, even with his mask on, speaks to the ear. His voice is picked up and wirelessly transmitted. So it's plausible. The problem is doing this for any length of time, and it still hasn't been realised. This generated other art projects, a 4-metre long sculpture of the ear on my arm. Lying on the sculpture, my body was covered in white slip, white clay, just to make it kind of part of the sculptural installation. It was very cold, my body's warm, the clay begins to crack, so you have this strange cracked skin of a body lying on a sort of counterpoint to a much larger fragment of the body. But whilst I was lying on this sculpture, I thought it might be interesting to suspend the body above the sculpture, and 18 hooks into the skin. When the steel cable takes the full weight of the body, the cable begins to untwist, the body begins to spin. I thought it would spin for about 5 minutes. It continued spinning for 15 minutes. So this performance began when the body was hoisted off the sculpture, and the performance ended when the body was lowered down. But in this performance, the body is connected to the end of an industrial robot arm, 6 degree of freedom robot arm. And so here you could precisely program the position orientation of the body, the trajectory, and the velocity of the body. Sound is important in this performance. And when the choreography of the body was over, the body was replaced with a large sculpture of the artist's ear, and the same choreography was performed. What's interesting is that a robot that choreographs the ear is the same robot that carved the ear. The robot, of course, can be a 6 degree of freedom CNC machine. So the body here becomes an extended operational system of bodily metabolism, machine musculature, and computational programming. So for me, there was always a ghost in the machine, but not as a vital force that animates, but rather as a fading attestation of the human. Stickman is a minimal but full body exoskeleton that for this 5-hour continuous performance algorithmically actuates the body. The body, though, has one leg free. It needs one leg to balance on. And with that one leg, it can pivot and it can change, modify its shadow, and also manipulate the video feedback projection. So even though the artist is largely performing involuntarily via the exoskeleton, the artist can still insert some agency into the performance. And in a more recent performance, we engineered a mini stickman as an interface. So people who came to the gallery were able to manipulate the mini stickman, press play, and insert their choreography into the performance. And it was obviously more comfortable when I was moving than when I was in an awkward position and nothing was happening. The exoskeleton arm was engineered for a performance titled Rewired Remixed, where for 5 days, 6 hours every day continuously, I could only see with the eyes of someone in London. I could only hear with the ears of someone in New York. but anyone anywhere could access my right arm and animate the movements of my right arm. So it was a kind of distributing of agency to people in remote places, and also a sharing of visual and acoustical senses. I mean, how you manage this is, I think you just simply slide between different kinds of modes of awareness. So, for example, when I was in the Tate Modern in London, my visual attention takes over. When I was in a Chinese restaurant in New York, and one friend is talking in my left ear and the other friend is talking in my right ear whilst someone's ordering food in Chinese, obviously it's my acoustical attention that's captured. So it's not so much that you're overwhelmed simultaneously with different modes of attention, but rather you tend to focus on one or the other, or that was the experience I had. This was only for 4 days, 5 hours every day continuously. This was with live streaming in Europe between 3 locations. I didn't know what I was going to see, I didn't know what I was going to hear, and I didn't know whenever anyone choreographed the movements of my arm.
Ganz viele verschiedene Sachen und Kunden.
So as well as an age of circulating flesh, fractal flesh, it's also a time of phantom flesh, where, you know, offline we're performing as physical biological bodies, but online we're performing with our phantoms, with our virtual bodies. Our reclining stick man is a 9 metre long, 4 metre high stick figure robot that continuously rotates on its axis. This was also interactive online, so anyone anywhere could access this robot and remotely control it. In fact, in Australia, during the Biennial of Australian Art, the museum had to close for several months during the pandemic. This was the only art installation that people could actually witness and interact with all during that time, 24 hours a day. I did do a performance where my body is positioned on the torso of the robot. The sounds that you're hearing are compressed air sounds, solenoid clicks, and the whirring sounds of the rotational motor. So the artist on the robot was interacting with people who were online or people who were interacting locally in the gallery. So in other words, I was improvising and responding to other people's motions that the robot was generating. We had an aesthetic surveillance system of 4 cameras, one positioned on the robot, and so people online could see their movements from different viewpoints. So you have to imagine that the robot is actuated by pneumatic rubber muscles, the festo muscles you might know of. So as the muscles are inflated with air, they expand in girth and contract about 20% of their length. So effectively they're linear actuators, only pulling, they don't push, but actuating the stick figure robot in a more organic and biological way, similar to how the muscles function with your body. And when I first imagined this project, I thought of it as a kind of contemporary pietà, you know, a small human in the clutches of a much larger robot. Nina Sellers, though, more astutely observed this as the human being merely a body that is a human strap-on for the robot. This is not figurative, but it's certainly anthropomorphic. It's an installation 8 meters high, 7 meters in diameter. This is a deformable, flexible tensegrity structure. And there's a vision and computational system. So as someone approaches the installation, as someone is under the tensegrity canopy, depending on your position, proximity, movement, depending on whether there's more than one person or only yourself, the system decides how to respond. So it can respond with an undulating movement, with a glitchy movement, with a breathing movement. So the machine system responds to the position, motion, proximity, and number of people underneath it. This is simply the valve, design that is in the acrylic box underneath the central column of the machine. It gives you an idea of the scale as well. It's, you know, about this wide in diameter. And this was engineered with the collaboration of Paul Lowe and David Leggett at the Science Gallery in Melbourne for their Swarm exhibition. And there was a performance. I performed with one of the tensegrity modules. So you can imagine this is actually just one of these modules. There's about 600 of them, all interconnected. And for this performance, the machine, of course, as it's moving, it's generating its own compressed air, solenoid clicking sounds. And what we did was we did some machine learning with this tensegrity module. So as I twisted, compressed or expanded, I spatialized the sound. We had a series of speakers around the audience. So as I turned, the sound shifts and moves around, or as I compress or contract the module, I can generate additional sounds to complement the compressed sounds of the machine. And to finish off, just an example I like to use, in 2011, the first twin turbine heart was inserted into the chest of a terminally ill patient. He lived long enough to fully test this more robust, more reliable and smaller artificial heart. And what's interesting is that this twin turbine heart circulates the blood continuously without pulsing. So in the near future, you might rest your head on your loved one's chest. They're warm to the touch, they're sighing, they're speaking, they're certainly alive. They have no heartbeat. So imagine a population of humans without heartbeats. For all sorts of metaphorical and physiological reasons, that becomes disconcerting somewhat. So what's happening these days? The dead, the brain dead, the partially living, the yet to be born, the cryogenically preserved, the prosthetically augmented, synthetic life, artificial life, all now share a material and proximal existence. The digital is not merely the realm of the virtual. The body individually escapes or achieves planetary escape velocity, but the human can no longer achieve escape velocity from its machinic and digital realm. So we kind of have to live with it and manage it. And of course, what it means to be human is perhaps not to remain human at all in the traditional construct of what we think of as being human. And of course, we have to remember that all futures are both, or should be, considered both contingent and contestable. Nothing is going to happen of necessity. A future is not a future if it is not of the unexpected. Thank you very much. And if you haven't read some of these theories, some of these philosophers and media theorists and scientists, I would recommend you do so. They really challenge our understanding of the world and understanding of our bodies and technology. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
In practice, this is a very costly thing to do. It's not just a matter of taking apart a mobile phone, because some of those components are small enough, but they're not biocompatible. You can't just simply shove them under your skin. Of course, we're now, the scientific community is beginning to 3D print with living cells. In another 20 years, you'd be able to 3D print an ear construct, for example, using your own stem cells or cells derived from your own stem cells. So immunologically okay to do that. The problem at the moment with 3D printing is 3D printing a vascular system, you know. And even if you were able to do all that, you would still need microsurgery to connect and provide supply. The other possibility, of course, is that there's already research being done in 3D printing circuitry within a 3D printed biopolymer construct. And so it's feasible to imagine 3D printing a circuit within a stem cell 3D printed ear. But again, that's probably another 50 years away. I won't be around for that.
Tonight, and I want to ask you to expand a bit on this idea of no birth, no death, and also because obviously you have some also like a theory, approach in the form of a manifesto. So you use the body and your artistic practice somehow to also reflect upon a certain issue or the contemporary. And in this, specifically the fetus part, like the implant, where you think, okay, somebody could be born and their mother is dead ages before something. Yes. You know, we have in the postmodern many interpretations of time, or many ways to describe it, but there's definitely something about a sequence of events. Yes. That might have a biological order. So that, how do you think that this breaking of the biological order may affect the very essence of the?
Yeah, I mean, time and space are interesting notions, and they have been philosophically ever since Kant, or before Kant, but Kant basically says that time and space doesn't exist, you know, that it's simply the way the body experiences or articulates the world. So time and space, it's not an objective kind of dimension, rather it's how the body experiences the world. More recently, physicists, and also expressed through the writings of Donald Hoffman, where there's now conjecture that time and space may not be the basic fabric of the world. So I believe that at minus 43 centimeters, and so these at scale, minus 43 and minus 33 seconds, at those very small scales, it's no longer meaningful to talk about time and space as being the infrastructure of the world. So there's a lot of, and of course the theory of time as block time. So, you know, there's no, you know, we imagine that time is linear, that there's a past, there's a present, and there's a future. But with block time, everything really exists simultaneously. We see time as just simply change. But of course, we've developed instrumentation that kind of conveniently divides the way that we can function in the world effectively. So I think these, I don't know whether the particular biological desynchronization from the reproductive cycle, I think that will contribute in a trivial way to our acceptance of time as simply linear. Because if a woman's fertilized egg, which was frozen, you know, 50 years ago, now becomes viable and you know, becomes a fetus and is born a baby, you know, what's the meaningfulness of these historical moments anymore? Everything kind of washes together. So I think in a trivial sense, perhaps, but not in a more. I think what physicists are telling us cosmologically is happening is a bit more relevant in that sense, and some philosophers as well.
Oh, there's another question there, yeah.
Do you have a follow-up? So you had so many experiences with human machine working together. But I noticed like two teams, like there are two teams, like it's either the prosthetic augmentation of human body or interacting with a robot, separate entity. Where does this distinction start? Is it about the size of the machine, or is it about the proximity, or is it about the way it is attached to your body? When do you start to like acknowledge it as, you know, that there is cost in the machine, it's an autonomous robot that is actually collaborating with you on a task, rather than your prosthetic augmentation body?
Yeah, I mean, I don't make any distinctions. I mean, of course, scientifically, you know, you can research one or the other. As I mentioned, these actions are aesthetic sort of gestures as to different possibilities. So I don't see any difference. I guess I characterize the work as an oscillation between one concern and another. So the earlier performances certainly focus on the physicality of the body and exploring the internal psychological and physical parameters of the body. But then the realization that the body needs to be augmented. I mean, you know, we have a biological body, you know, with a limited sense of perception and a limited way of, and a limited speed of operation in the world. So this is no longer adequate in a technical terrain of much more precise, much more powerful machinery, instruments that can measure and extend and enhance our vision beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum that we can perceive biologically. And I mean, this is a realization that not only happens to the artist, but has happened throughout human history. In fact, ever since we can say hominids functioned as bipedal with bipedal locomotion, their two limbs become manipulators, and thereafter hominids are constructing objects, artifacts, and more recently instruments and machines and computational systems. So I think we still have a romantic attachment to the biological body as what's essential, but of course what we determine, what constructs the human, is very different now. So a human is very much a hybrid human machine, instrumental and computational system.
There are more questions, but I have to say bye-bye, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
But thank you.
Oh no,
It was
thank
fantastic.
you. Yeah.
And obviously, I don't want to stop you to ask more questions. You have some more time. Yeah, you have some more time.
Oh yeah, that's another
and
topic.
we have the arm here. Maybe people can have.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay.
If you'd like to have a look at the arm, I can
Yeah.
show it to you a bit more.
Okay, I'll leave it to you. Yeah, but fantastic, and I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have questions here, Buki.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. There's so many things I want to ask, and so many things I still need to internalize before I should ask them. But a couple of things that are like on the tip of my head is like, given the advancements in tech and your
Given the
advancements in tech and your prior experiments, what would be the things that you would like to revisit, or things that you would have liked done before but were constrained by tech? And as a follow-up to that question is, how much of your performances, of your things that you've done, how much you have to compromise between your artistic vision and what was technically possible? And finally, how did you fund all of that?
how did I
Fund all of that?
fund with great difficulty. Yeah, most of these projects are not done within like research institutions, right? So funding is done in an ad hoc way, occasionally by an arts council, occasionally by the Wellcome Trust, sometimes self-funded, the Stickman exoskeleton, for example, the third hand was self-funded, great financial difficulty over a number of years. So funding is always a problem. Fortuitously, there may be a possibility of creating a soft robotics project here at Queen Mary. At the Sorbonne in Paris, we're working on a new ARM project using a cable drive system, which means the arm can be very light and the motors can be positioned anywhere else, but they don't have to be positioned within the arm constructors at all. And I'm meeting with an art foundation in Barcelona who got in touch to possibly fund the project, but the funding won't be enough, for example. So there's always budget constraints. There's always expertise that's required, that's not always available. And it's always determined by state of the art. And that I'm not always able, I mean, for example, I've always been interested in micro robotics or nanotechnology, but I haven't yet been able to access those facilities, and they're, you know, operating vastly different scales. And whether these would be interesting artistic outcomes or not, that would be open to question anyway. And I think what's important is that these projects generate ideas that you know, would not have been otherwise. So most of what I've said, certainly I read a lot and try to keep up with some of the latest theories philosophically and scientifically, but I often I'm often seduced by some of these because they synchronize with some of my own personal experiences.
And like, I know it's a really tough thing to ask, but when you, let's say you're making something and you have an artistic vision for it, right? And you think like, if I build it like this, it's going to have the impact on the audience that I want, or is going to evoke some sort of feeling, and then you are, due to constrained budgets, technical expertise, you are unable to finish it exactly as you had it in your artistic vision. I just wonder, in your artist life, how often that happens? Like, I know it's a tough thing to say. Like, well, could you put a number to it, like percent?
No, all the time. I mean, for example, with the third hand, it only has wrist rotation, pinch release, grasp release. But if you were to look at the third hand again, there's an empty space in the support structure of the hand, and that was supposed to provide some space for an additional motor and a gearing system to rotate the hand around the arm. That would have been interesting because the third hand only can rotate in one place now. Imagine rotating, but also around the arm as well. So if I was to do that project again, that would be something that you would add to it. The six-legged walking robot and the walking machine, again, you know, they walk in simple kind of insect-like ways, but they don't do obstacle avoidance, for example. You know? So, I mean, there's lots of, you know, layers of additional capabilities or sensor systems, and of course now with more interesting computational software and AI, you can make them much more autonomous. So yeah, almost every project can be re-engineered to be much more interesting and more sophisticated in its vision, in its proximity sensing, in its optical avoidance.
We have time for two more questions, one here and one there.
Sorry to deviate a bit from the sort of biomechanical angle. You're questioning some of these ideas of what it is to be human and how it's changing. Do you think there's any capacities that are too difficult to change and could become meaningless? One thing that springs to mind would be the idea of memory prosthesis, the way we process time and the way Becky mentioned slicing up. When you change that, we would have no construction of self, maybe. Do you think there's any seams on what it is to be human which are much harder to push against and not have adaptations?
Oh, I think what constructs the self, is a lot of variables, physiological differences, gender differences, cultural conditioning. Our social institutions determine most of our behaviours. We're all dressed. We all speak in a certain polite way. In fact, one can argue that the body has always been a kind of zombie body that performs habitually and largely conditioned by its culture, by its society, by its religion, and so on. But it's already become a kind of cyborg body where it requires the addition of some kind of augmentation, some kind of instrumental and computational machine. I mean, I wouldn't be here in London if I wasn't propelled in a plane, from Australia, 14 hours or whatever. So our body is accelerated beyond its physical capacities now. Our body is computationally and instrumentally enhanced beyond its 1400 cubic centimetre brain. But, in a sense, we're very, very fragile bodies. We have to continuously gulp air to survive. We have to guzzle water, most days. If we lose 10% of our body fluids, we're dead. We can be contaminated by microbial life, bacterial life, viral life that is invisible and so small we can't even sense that it enters our bodies, but it can be fatal. We have a very, very relatively small lifespan. It takes you about 50 years to wise up to yourself. And then you quickly deteriorate and die. So, we have a limited existence. We're fragile, we're vulnerable. We can be easily damaged, both psychologically and physiologically. And yet, with this frail, unpredictable existence we all lead, we can generate, a human society that archives its culture and perpetuates, knowledge and distributes and disseminates it. But now we need machines to do that. So I think that's the inevitable and inextricable connection that we've, made, and we just have to manage how we do that.
And final question from Becky.
Thank you for amazing presentation. I'm interested to know, so all of your art installations, I think for us researchers can be perceived as experiments on yourself. So I'm interested to kind of know what was the most difficult or most interesting experience as a subject in your own experiments, and not just an artist or researcher.
Well, firstly, as I alluded to before, there's no kind of agenda to what I'm doing. And there's no specific research or exploration. But, you have a conceptual continuity. And the most difficult project actually was the stomach sculpture. I mean, I've suspended my body about 27 times with hooks into the skin in different locations, in different situations. For example, in Copenhagen, I was suspended 60 meters above the Royal Theatre. After 30 meters, all I could hear was the whooshing of the wind, the whirring of the crane motors, and the creaking of the skin. But the most difficult project was the stomach sculpture, because you know, to insert something into your body, and the idea wasn't to make something very small. The idea was actually to make something very large. So inside the stomach cavity, it would, you know, your stomach is about the size of your fist. Of course, when it's inflated or when it's full, it can be extended in size. And so my stomach had to be inflated with air to make it safe to insert the sculpture inside my body. But the sculpture itself didn't do the filming. We used an additional endoscope. So the control cable of the stomach was 8 millimeters in diameter. The endoscope was 10 millimeters in diameter. So 2 cables down your esophagus, and you couldn't keep them down for a lengthy period of time, because anything inside your stomach generates excessive fluids, and so you have to extract them and then do it. So it took 2 days and 6 insertions to film about 15 minutes of video. So the actual filming was separate from the sculpture itself, and the sculpture was tethered to a servo motor and a logic circuit external to the body. It was a flexi drive cable. So, you know, we couldn't fit everything into the sculpture itself. So it wasn't sort of self-powered, or it wasn't something that could be easily swallowed. It was too large. It's about the size of my thumb. So it was 50 millimeters long and 15 millimeters in diameter. And when it's fully expanded, it was 75 millimeters long, 50 millimeters in diameter. So about the size of my fist, the sculpture, when it was fully opened inside the stomach, opening and closing, extending and retracting, flashing light and a beeping sound. That was the most difficult, but the ear project is been the longest, and that's required so far 4 surgical procedures to get it to this. It wasn't instant. Initially, we had to expand the skin of my arm. So we had an expander inserted beneath the skin. I was self-injecting sterile saline solution for 2 months, expanding the skin to the size, like almost the size of an orange. I couldn't put a sweater or a coat on. And then that expander was taken out before that surgery that you saw. So you produced excess skin to enable it to wrap around the scaffold. So different projects were difficult in different ways, sometimes difficult physically, sometimes difficult technically. The fractal flesh performance, that was in 1995. That was really soon after the World Wide Web. So we had great difficulty in technically setting that up and making sure that it would happen. And the 3D model was using VRML, which is no longer sort of used, but it enabled us to produce a 3D model that we could have online that could mimic the movements of the mechanism itself.
What situation did you find most confusing?
I was hoping you'd say most foolish.
Confusing, like you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I ever found anything confusing. I mean, the rewired remix performance, that was 6 hours a day continuously for 5 days. I wouldn't say that was confusing, but the approach that I always take is to perform in a posture of indifference. And by performing with indifference, I mean performing having no expectations. So you allow things to happen in their own time, in their own rhythm, in their own way. So so you're never really confused or perplexed. You may be bemused, but yeah, nothing has been confusing. And of course, you hope that your planning somehow is good enough that allows you to realize. So ideas are easy, right? I mean, as scientists, as engineers, ideas are easy, but to actualize those ideas, to engineer and physically manifest those ideas, that's what's interesting, that's what's difficult. So that's really the characterization I would make with these performances.
I suggest we finish the formal part of the talk. Thank you very much, Stelarc. And Stelarc will remain in London for the next week for the biggest conference which we are organizing. It's called ICRA. So there'll be a dedicated session on arts and robotics led by Stelarc. And if you like, you are welcome to come here now to look at the technology and have a less formal conversation. We still have some time in the room. Thank you very much for joining the talk.
Thank you.